Today we will talk about exceptions and exception handling in Java. So, what is an exception? So, exception is basically a type of error which disturbs the normal working of a program. So, let's look at it through an example and see what is really an exception. So, exception is, as I say, it's a type of error which disturbs the normal flow of a program. So, if you have been programming in Java, you have definitely experienced this. So, today we will see that how we can handle them, how we can ignore or avoid these type of errors. So, let me show you a simple exception error. So, suppose we have an object of the scanner class, and what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna take input. So I have a simple variable called num, and I'm gonna ask the user to enter a number. So also and then next I'm gonna call the nextInt function, which will take an integer, and after taking the input, I'm gonna print that input successful, right? So once this is done, I want to print that my input was successful. So right, and you can imagine that more code is below this. So now we have got a little program. So let's run it. So uh, as you see, it is asking for our input. Let's enter 12, and as you can see, it has executed the next line and our program has ended. So in this case, our program was executed perfectly, but what if something goes wrong? And that's our focus of today. So let's run our program again. So now it's asking for a number, but what if the user or the tester intentionally or accidentally enters something else like a character? What if the user enters a character like J? So now you see the problem. So now this is an exception. So our exception is input mismatch. So here we asked for an integer, right? But the user entered a character, right? Character or a string or anything. So let's run it again. Let's look at it once more. So now let's enter a string instead of a number. So now again we got an exception. So it is telling us that input mismatch. So this is the type of exception called input mismatch. So as the name states, it occurs whenever there is a mismatch of input. So this is what this is the most simplest case of an exception. You have definitely experienced this if you have coded in Java before, and now we will see how we can handle it. But I want to show you one more thing. So if you are noticing that as soon as an exception occurs, our program stops. So our program stops right there, since this is the line at which the exception occurred. So as you can see, it is telling us the exception occurred at line number 9. So this is our line number 9, which has been selected now. This is where our exception occurred, and our program stopped right here. It terminated. It didn't execute the next line. So as soon as any exception occurs, our program stops working. So now we are gonna handle it. So we can use the try and catch block. So to handle any exception, add the code in which we can expect an exception. So I'm not gonna add my whole program into this try block. since this is the only piece in which we can expect any exception, so I'm gonna add my exception in this for this piece only, since I don't need to add consider other pieces, since this will execute fine no matter what. But this is the only line in which we can expect any type of exception. And then I'm going to use the catch keyword, then in parentheses I'm going to use the exception e. So I'm using the exception clause. I've created an object of the exception clause, and then in the catch block I'm gonna add the code to handle the exception. So now, uh, now we got our code. So let's go through it once more. So this is the try block in which we will uh, enter our code, which can lead to any type of exception. We can add multiple lines, as many lines we need. We can even add our whole main method into this try block, and in the catch block, make sure to add this exception e. I'm gonna uh, I'm gonna handle my code. So I'm gonna in the catch block, you basically need to tell compiler what to do when an exception occurs. So if you have no catch block, this is the default thing. So as you can see, E is an object of the exception class. So I have access to all its methods. So let's use a method of the exception class. So this is the method that is executed when if you don't use the try catch block. Let's run our program again. So now, as you can see, it has given an exception. It is printing this. So this is getting printed here, right? Uh, this is the getting printed here, and this is the input successful. So what this code does, it basically prints the exception. What if we don't have this here? What now? So now it's asking for a number. So now, as you can see, nothing is happening. Our program is going fine, even though we have entered something wrong. So let's make our code more readable. So remember, through E you can do anything. Like E has ton of function like get cause. You can get the cause of the exception. Uh, Similarly, there are numerous other functions available like get message, get stack trace, or you can write your own code. So now I'm gonna write my own code, and I'm gonna say that invalid input, right? So now let's run our program. So now if notice, if I give the right input, if there's no chance of exception, uh, my code will execute fine. So as you can see, this catch block will only be executed if an exception occurs. So in my current case, no exception occurred. Therefore, this piece didn't get executed. So now it printed a line. Now let's try an invalid input like KKO. And now, as you can see, this catch block is getting executed, and after that our program goes as it normally would. Now let's use a do while loop to continuously take input until we get the right input, right? So now let's run our program do. Let's use a do while loop. So do while loop, it will keep executing as long as our input isn't correct. So here I'm gonna say that while one, so while true, so it means that or I can have a condition. So let's enter think of a condition. So what we can put here, so I can say as long as uh, num is less than equal to 0, or we can do something else. So now it will only have the positive values, and I'm gonna initialize it to 0 by default. And here I'm gonna use the continue keyword. And what the continue keyword does, it as soon as our program says continue, it moves to the top of the loop body without executing the next statements. And here I can add something else like true. So now again we have an error, and we need to introduce a break. So we need to add a break statement somewhere around here, but yeah, let's add a break here. So now what I have done, so in case an exception occurs, so this is an infinite loop, right? It will keep on executing as long as it doesn't reach here. So if any exceptions occur, I'm gonna print invalid input, and then I'm gonna use the continue keyword. So continue keyword, as soon as continue keyword occurs, it will move to the top of the loop again. It will move here, and it will never reach this break. But if the catch block is not executed, it will reach the break and our loop will end. Let's run our program now. Let's see what happens now. So I'm gonna enter a number like 12. So now, as you can see, we got our input successfully. But what if because it came to this break block? So while true basically means infinite loop until we break it ourselves. So let's enter invalid. So now, as you can see, we got an infinite loop. Why we are getting that? Because remember, I entered a string instead of a number. So in this number, a string is stored. So I need to discard the invalid input. So the current input which is stored into this num, I need to get it out of this number, right? So I'm gonna use num dot next, sorry, input dot next. So it will basically discard the input, the invalid input which was stored into this num variable. So let's run again. So now, as you can see, we got our program working. It's saying that it's invalid, and let's enter another number like 44. So now it gave us successful. So this loop will keep executing as long as our input is invalid. You can enter anything like any string, and it will work out just fine. So there are more example of exception like let me show you one little example real quick. So let's suppose we have an array. uh, I'm gonna access the sixth index and I'm gonna assign it 12, right? Let's run our program. What happens now? So as you can see, now we have an index out of bounds exception. So this is another example of exception. This occurs if our index is out of bounds. So our maximum index is 4, right? Our array indexes for this array are 0 to 4 since it is of size 5. But I entered 6 here, which is out of range, which is out of range of our current array. So this is an exception. You can handle this in the same way by using the try catch block. Make sure to give it a try to understand it more, but it works exactly the same. You just simply have to change the logics and add more stuff into it, and it will work out just fine. So now if I run my program now, so I'm gonna say that invalid. So as you can see, it gave us invalid. Similarly, you can take the input from the user and you can add a do while loop, so to make the program better. But that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching.